would be Joseph. Dr. Joseph Healy is both a historian and a poet. Joseph is a keen political activist and a campaigner for human rights and LGBT rights, having recently co-founded the London Irish LGBT Network. He's also recently taken an interest in studying Roger Casement, who was inspired by his experience in Congo. So I think that should be interesting and it's relevant for this debate, this discussion tonight. So I'd like to welcome Joseph to give us a book reading and enlighten us.
So Conrad mentioned earlier the legacy of slavery and colonialism, and that is very much the link with Roger Casement. And for me, as an Irish person growing up in the 60s, around the time of the 50th commemoration of the 1916 uprising, was around the time that Roger Casement's body was brought back to Ireland to lie in state. He died, he was executed not far from here in Pentonville Prison in 1916, so 100 years ago. And I remember all of us school children getting the day off to go and visit his body lying in state, and we wondered who was this mysterious person who was presented at the time as a martyr of the 1916 rising and almost a Catholic saint. And I was talking to Conrad the other day about my memories of Ireland and what the Congo meant. And in the 60s, those of us who were at school, it meant, the Irish UN military involvement in the Congo during the Civil War. And there were several words which were thrown around then. If you were a particularly bad-mannered child or particularly troublesome, you were called a Baluba, which was, of course, one of the tribes involved in the war in the Congo. And my mother was studying medicine at the time, and so I was probably one of the only people in Dublin to meet African people, because she would actually bring back friends who were African medical students, and for us this was like a totally exotic encounter because we lived in a very monocultural Ireland, which has really only seen immigration on that, of any significant scale in the last 10, 15 years. So we grew up in a very different Ireland to today. But there is a link between Casement and the struggles against colonialism and so on, and we can see a direct link between the 1916 uprising, which is the first major crack in the British Empire and the imperialist structure, and that leads on to inspire a lot of the freedom movements in India and Africa and other places. And Casement is he's a very controversial figure still. He has many different aspects, but he is regarded by many people as effectively the father of the modern human rights movement, because he was one of the first people to actively blow the whistle on what was happening in Africa, and particularly in the Congo. And later on he went on to do the same thing in Latin America, in Amazonia, in Peru. And that is why one of the books I'm using tonight as a source is by the Nobel Prize winning Peruvian writer Mario Vargas Llosa, who has written a book about Casement called in Spanish El Sueño del Celta, in English The Dream of the Celt, where he actually writes the entire story of Casement's life. And there's a lot of any events that have been held this year to commemorate Casement have always involved the Congolese and the Peruvian ambassadors and so on. So he's seen as a heroic figure still in many of those countries. So I went to a symposium during the summer, a Casement symposium, and there was one of his biographers was there who comes from a unionist tradition. Now I have to say, Conrad said to me tonight, a lot of people here probably will never have heard of Casement because they don't necessarily come from an Irish background. But this person began presenting a paper saying Casement was a traitor to his country in his past, meaning his country being the United Kingdom, or the Empire or whatever, and his class being the Anglo-Irish aristocracy. Because he's a very unlikely hero, because in fact he grew up in a rather privileged background, an Anglo-Irish background. He was born in Dublin in 1864. He had a lot of links with County Antrim. His family traditionally had lived near Ballycastle in County Antrim in Northern Ireland. When his mother died, he lived in England for a while, and then he moved back to County Antrim and became very influenced by a lot of the traditions and so on in County Antrim. He developed an interest in the Irish language and things like that. But then he goes on to pursue a very mainstream career, becoming an official. Well, first of all, he goes to Africa to become involved in an enterprise which is exploring the Congo. And you've all heard of Dr. Livingstone and Stanley. And Stanley is one of the explorers who is actually commissioned by King Leopold of the Belgians to explore this unknown territory, this huge territory, the Congo. And Casement begins to work for one of the industrial outfits who are sort of looking into that. And it's true that he begins to explore what's actually happening in the Congo. So the background of it, it's so appalling that it's actually almost satirical, because Leopold of the Belgians goes to the European states and tells them that he is actually from philanthropic motives in order to rescue Africans from slavery. He's actually going to take over control of this vast territory and run it in such a way that the Africans will receive a good education and enlightened and so on. Of course, the reality is that he's actually going in to make an enormous profit. So I'm just going to begin with one of the biographies which came out this year on Roger Casement by Angus Mitchell. There have been a series of biographies about the leaders of 1916 Rising called 16 Lives. And Casement begins, after a while in the Congo, he's appointed the British consul, and he begins then to investigate what is actually happening in the Congo in order to write a report and bring it to the attention of the world. By the way, Joseph Conrad's novel Heart of Darkness is based on what happened in the Congo, and of course it's better known now as Apocalypse Now, isn't it? So Casement writes, "The root of the evil to my mind lies in the fact that the Congo government is first of all a trading concern, that everything else is subordinated to the lust of gain, and that only when its claims in this respect are attended to does it become an instrument of reform. It is not the white men on the Congo who are so bad, as that the system under which they serve is evil. Their first duty is to show a profitable balance sheet, and a well-governed district in all other respects may be anywhere they please at the end of their annual statement." So, there's a lot of discussion about outsourcing and privatisation and so on. This is effectively an outsourcing, a privatisation of a huge area of Africa for Leopold of the Belgians to run as he wishes as a profitable venture. So I'm just going to turn to another section of Angus Mitchell's book. So when Casement investigates what's happening in the Congo, he reports back to the Foreign Office and he presents a report which will in the end result in Leopold losing control of the Congo. There will be public outcry throughout Europe as a result of Casement's report. Casement's report was presented at the Houses of Parliament on the 11th of February 1904. It would cause an extraordinary and long-lasting diplomatic sensation. On an initial reading, it is not obviously influenced by any revolutionary or ideological commitment. As befits a government report, the narrative gives little away about the author and is couched in the language of officialdom. The style is detached, objective, factual, and all personal sentiments largely hidden from view. However, it is still a terse condemnation of the system, exposing the betrayal of the humanitarian principles and promises laid down by Western powers in the Articles of Berlin. So the Articles of Berlin is where Leopold had promised that he was bringing Western civilization and philanthropy to the Africans. Domination of the moral high ground was critical to Casement's investigative report and made him a stickler for truth. He was determined that there would be no grounds for undermining the legitimacy of his findings. In a letter to the missionary explorer George Grenfell, he stressed, "It is essential that I should attribute nothing to you that you did not actually state to me." Communicating with the Foreign Office shortly after his arrival in England, he wrote, "I must be quite sure of my ground before I intervene officially. It would never do to lay myself open to the charge of acting on insufficient or inadequate grounds." In a further official missive sent after the publication of the report, he explained about his determination from the outset to establish internal evidences of truth. So the report creates a sensation, first of all in Britain and throughout Europe. And Leopold effectively starts a spin operation to try and discredit the report, try and discredit Casement and so on, spends a lot of money on this, but in the end it isn't effective. And Casement's report, as I said, becomes the basis for Leopold losing control of the Congo. Now, what is the reason why Leopold is so interested in the Congo? I mean, it is because the Congo at that time was the source of the rubber trade. There were only two areas in the world in which the rubber plant grew naturally. One was in Amazonia, which Casement goes to later to investigate similar atrocities, and the other one was the Congo. So if we think in terms of the value of rubber at that time, it's probably the equivalent of gold or diamonds now. So this was a huge, treasure trove for Leopold to run as his own private company, in effect. So this is just a description of one of the things that Casement witnessed in the Congo. This is from Maria Vargas Llosa's book. When Roger and his small company of 5 porters and a Zanzibarian entered the village, the 3 or 4 huts were already ashes and the residents had fled. The exception was a boy, almost a child, lying on the ground, his hand and feet tied to stakes, on whose back Lieutenant Franqui was easing his frustration with lashes from his chicote. Whippings were generally administered not by officers but by soldiers, but the lieutenant undoubtedly felt offended by the flight of the entire village and wanted revenge. The reason for this is because they would actually go into villages and seize entire villages as slave labour for the rubber plantations. So of course if the villagers managed to escape, the police and soldiers would be very angry. His expression did not change when he saw Roger and his group appear. He simply responded to his greeting with a nod, not interrupting the punishment. The boy must have lost consciousness some time earlier. His back and legs were a bloody mass, and Roger remembered the detail, a column of ants marching close by his body. "You have no right to do that, Lieutenant Franqui," he said in French. "That is enough." The officer, a short man, lowered the chicote and turned to look at Roger's long silhouette, bearded, unarmed, carrying a staff to test the ground and move aside debris during the march. A little dog scampered between his legs. Surprise made the lieutenant's round face, with its trim moustache and small blinking eyes, pass from bright red to ashen and back to red again. "What did you say?" he roared. Roger saw him let go of the chicote, move his right hand to his waist, and fumble with the cartridge belt where the butt of his revolver protruded. In a second he realised that in a fit of temper the officer might shoot him. He reacted quickly. Before the lieutenant could take out his weapon, he had him by the back of the neck and at the same time seized the revolver he had just grasped. Lieutenant Franqui tried to loosen the fingers at the nape of his neck. His eyes bulged like a toad's. The 8 soldiers from the Force Publique was like a privatised police force for Leopold's Congo. The 8 soldiers from the Force Publique who had been watching the punishment as they smoked had not moved, but Roger supposed that, disconcerted by what had happened, they had their hands on their rifles and were waiting for an order from their leader to take action. "My name is Roger Casement. I work for the SEE, and you know me very well, Lieutenant Franqui, because we played poker in Matadi," he said, letting him go, bending down to pick up the revolver and returning it to him with an amiable expression. "The way you're whipping this young boy is a crime, no matter what offence he committed. As an officer of the Force Publique, you know that better than I, because you undoubtedly know the laws of the Congo Free State. If the boy dies because of this lashing, the crime will weigh on your conscience. When I came to the Congo, I took the precaution of leaving my conscience behind in my own country," the officer said. Now he wore a mocking expression and seemed to be wondering whether Casement was a fool or a madman. His hysteria had dissipated. "Just as well you moved quickly. I was about to put a bullet in you. I would have found myself involved in a nice diplomatic dispute if I'd killed an Englishman. In any case, I advise you not to interfere, as you've just done, with my colleagues in the Force Publique." They are bad characters, and things could go worse for you with them than with me. His anger had passed, and now he seemed depressed. He purred that someone had warned them about his coming. Now he would have to go back to Matadi empty-handed. He said nothing when Roger ordered the troops to untie the boy and put him in a hammock, and having tied this between two sticks, he left with him for Boma. When they arrived 2 days later, the boy, in spite of his wounds and the blood he had lost, was still alive. Roger left him at the dispensary. He went to court to register a complaint against Lieutenant Franqui for abuse of authority. In the following weeks, he was called twice to make a deposition, and during the judge's long, stupid interrogations, he realised his accusation would be filed away and the officer not even admonished. By the time the judge finally ruled, throwing out the complaint for lack of evidence and because the victim refused to offer corroboration, Roger had resigned his post on the Sanford exploring expedition and was working once more for Henry Morton Stanley on the railroad being constructed parallel to the caravan route from Boma and Matadi to Leopoldville, Stanleypool. The boy who had been mistreated remained to work with Roger, and from then on was his servant and travelling companion through Africa. Since he could never say that his name was, Casement baptised him Charlie. He had been with him 16 years. So that's just one example of the type of atrocities which Casement came across. And just to turn for a second to the methods which Leopold was using in the Congo. So they started on using this system called the shikot, which was a whip that was made from hippopotamus hide. So the force publique became embedded like a parasite in the living organism in the tangled villages scattered over a region the size of Europe, measured from Spain to the borders of Russia, to be maintained by an African community that did not understand what was happening to it, except that the invasion that overtook it was a plague more devastating than slave hunters, locusts, red ants, and incantations that brought the sleep of death. Because the soldiers and militia of the force publique were greedy, brutal, and insatiable when it came to food, drink, women, animals, skins, ivory, in short, everything that could be stolen, eaten, drunk, sold, or fornicated with. At the same time, the exploitation of the Congolese began in this way. The humanitarian monarch, following another of the mandates he had received, started to grant concessions to businesses in order to open up, by means of commerce, the road to civilization for the natives of Africa. Some traders died overcome by malaria, bitten by snakes, or devoured by wild beasts due to their ignorance of the jungles, and another few fell to the poisoned arrows and spears of natives who dared rebel against these outsiders with weapons that exploded like thunder or burned like lightning. Colonists who explained to them that according to contracts signed by their chiefs, they had to abandon their planting, fishing, hunting rituals to become guides, porters, hunters, or harvesters of rubber without any salary at all. A good number of concessionaires, friends and favourites of the Belgian king, himself above all, made great fortunes in a very short time. If you actually want to see examples of this, if you go to Brussels, just outside Brussels is a huge museum. It's now called the Museum of African History or something like that, but it used to be called the Museum of Congolese History, and it was built at Terrebonne, which is just in the outskirts of Brussels. It was built on the profits from the Congo, and if you go throughout Brussels, look at the biggest, most grandiose buildings and so on, they're all based on these profits. And just to wind up, the most ironic thing of all is, if you ever go to Ostend, there is a statue on the seafront of King Leopold, surrounded by grateful Congolese who are looking up to him, thanking him for all he's done for them. But somebody with a sense of irony went recently and chopped the hands off one of the Congolese figures, which is what the Belgians used to do to people in the Congo. So you can see from this that Casement had a big role in trying to bring to life what was happening, and did in fact affect real change in Africa.
Thank you. Yeah.